What do you need to know about feeding common ingredients in 2026? Let's discuss the 2025 Adisseo Harvest Survey. Adisseo's Harvest Survey is conducted in the United States and Canada with the participation of our customers. In the United States, corn is analyzed, and in Canada, corn, wheat, dried distillers grains, and silage are analyzed. Hi, I am Darlene Bloxam, a Technical Service Manager at Adisseo. I work across many product lines, including our feed integrity line. I was also a contributor on the book Mycopedia, the ultimate guidebook to mycotoxins. Today we will cover the data from the Harvest Survey species by species and what it means to you, the producer. In the United States, we had 195 samples, and in Canada, we had 173 samples, which included corn, distillers, wheat, and silage. And silage was analyzed for ruminant risk only. Looking back at historical data, compared to last year, the occurrence of zearalenone is higher than 2024, but similar to 2023. DON is up slightly from being present in 56% of all samples compared to 63% of samples. The number of samples that tested positive from fumonisin decreased from the previous year from 77% to 47%. We understand this is a lot of data, and why should you care? Grains harvested during the 2025 season will be fed for the upcoming year. Understanding what these levels are can allow for producers to take the necessary steps when feeding ingredients. 38% of corn samples from the United States and Canada was high risk to poultry. This is very similar to corn from the United States alone, where 39% of the corn was deemed to be high risk to poultry. What is different between the countries is that the United States samples have more fumonisin present than the Canadian samples. Both countries have triclothecins present, which include deoxynelvanol. This can increase diarrhea and gastrointestinal disorders. Wheat in Canada only had 6% of samples that was considered high risk to poultry. B-triclothecins was the predominant mycotoxin in this ingredient. Overall, distillers dried grains for Canada was considered the highest risk ingredient, and this was driven by the quantity of B-triclothecins in all samples analyzed. Due to the quantity of B-triclothecins in most samples of DDGS, 94% of samples was high risk to poultry, which is a similar percentage of high risk samples in both swine and dairy as well. For corn samples for both the United States and Canada, at least 68% of samples were high risk to swine. This is due to swine being the most susceptible livestock species to mycotoxin, meaning they are negatively impacted at lower levels than other species. Fumonisins and B-triclothecins were predominantly present, which can cause gastrointestinal symptoms and immunosuppression. 76% of corn in the United States was high risk to swine. Multiple mycotoxins were present, which increased the likelihood of high-risk samples. Overall, distillers dried grain for Canada was the highest risk ingredient, and this was driven by the quantity of B-triclothecins in all samples analyzed. Due to the quantity of B-triclothecins in most samples, 94% of samples were high risk for swine, which is similar percentage of high-risk samples in poultry and dairy as well. 31% of corn samples were high risk to ruminants in the United States and Canada, which is similar to the United States, where 33% of corn samples were high risk to ruminants. Over 94% of wheat samples were considered low risk for ruminants. However, 71% of the samples contain B-triclothecins, which increases the risk of rumen dysbiosis. Silage is only assessed under ruminant risk. There were 64 samples that were considered silage-based, and these samples would only be fed to ruminants. Out of these samples, 18% would be considered high risk, and this poses an extra risk since silage can be a large component of the cattle ration. Distillers dried grain for Canada was the highest risk ingredient, and this was driven by the quantity of B-triclothecins in all samples analyzed. 94% of the samples were considered high risk for dairy, As we see from the data, mycotoxins can impact your business, so reach out to your Adisseo representative for more information on feed integrity solutions.